He's Howard Eibach, a former copywriter and creative director, and the author of 2 books on the creative brief.
And he's Henry Gomez, an ad agency strategist with 27 years of experience. Together, Henry and I are the Brief Brothers. We love talking about creative briefs, briefing, and advertising. And ladies and gentlemen, Henry is fresh off a wonderful vacation to Portugal, so maybe he'll tell us some stories. Well, Henry, we're back with another episode, and today we're going to revisit a couple of friends of ours, Peter Paul Von Wheeler and Matt Davies. They are the co-founders of an amazing service called betterbriefs.com. It's a website, but they also do training in writing better briefs from the marketer's perspective. So it's something that they and I share in common. We had them as guests. Well, actually, it's been quite a while ago when they did a global survey asking questions about the quality of briefs that marketers present to the agencies among those in Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the United States, and the United Kingdom. And it was no great surprise to you or I or many of us in the ad industry of this yawning gap between how marketers perceive the quality of their briefs and how agencies don't quite see it that way.
To say the least.
To say the least. Well, we had Peter Paul and Matt on the show. We had a great discussion. They've gone to do some wonderful things. And now they have teamed up with IPA, the Institute for Practitioners of Advertising in the UK, and a wonderful cartoonist who is so perceptive in our industry, Tom Fishburne, the marketunist, someone that we both admire. And by the way, just as a refresher, I have licensed a couple of his cartoons for my books. So that's how much I think of him. I'm willing to pay him to have some of his cartoons in my books, and maybe we can get him on the show.
That would be great. That would be fantastic.
Yeah. So Tom, if you're listening, I'm going to be reaching out to you. But anyway, Peter Paul and Matt collaborated with this fine person in Tom Fishburne and this amazing organization, the oldest advertising organization on the planet, as I understand. They've been around for over 100 years, to put together a compendium of cartoons that support and reinforce the ideas and findings of their survey from a couple of years ago. And, you and I were talking about this fine report, and we're going to include a link on this episode so viewers can go onto the betterbriefs.com website and download this important document themselves. We don't want to show, there are about 5 or 6 cartoons in the compendium, and we're not going to give away your thunder, Matt and Peter Paul, but we're going to take one slide, which we thought was really interesting, and it covered a topic that we don't talk about as much as we probably could. It's on reviewing, but let's just show, this is the cover. This is the opening cover of the compendium, the issues with briefs and how to make them better. And as I said, there are about 6 cartoons. We're just going to look at one of them. This one is
page 19. Yes.
Yeah, page 19. There are 6 cartoons. This is one on page 19. And as you can see, it's pretty self-explanatory. You have 3 judges reviewing some pieces of work, and they each have a different manner, style, approach to reviewing the work. And the reviewee is saying, well, maybe we need to be a little clearer on your evaluation criteria. And then, of course, Peter Paul and Matt cite the findings of their survey, which says 68% of marketers and 88% of agencies aren't clear on how creative work will be evaluated. And I think this is a great opportunity, Henry, for you and I to have a discussion, because as much as we love talking about how do you write a great brief, how do you evaluate a great brief, when do you know you've written a great brief, it's just as important, maybe equally important, maybe more important to know, okay, you've got the work in front of you based on this brief. Now, how do we judge it? And this, I think Tom has done an amazingly good job of summarizing the challenge. What is the criteria? I have actually done an entire workshop on how to evaluate creative, and I'll give you a little rundown on that in a moment. But Henry, I need to take a break here. I've been talking way too much. I want to give you an opportunity to get your thoughts on Tom's translation of this finding in the survey.
Yeah, so as a longtime strategist, a presenter in many creative presentations, I can attest to the fact that most client organizations don't have a uniform method for evaluating creative. And if they do, they don't make a habit of communicating that method to the clients. I mean, to the agencies. The agencies just kind of got to figure it out over time. I think, honestly, this is one of the weakest links in the creative process, in a process that has a lot of weak links, let's face it.
Right.
And that is because it can be so subjective. You know, one piece of creative might tickle one person's funny bone, and not the others. And you can see that here in the cartoon. The cartoon's really illustrating two things, right? The three people saw the same work, and they have not only three different methods for evaluating the work, but one of them has 9.8, presumably out of 10, which would be a great score. The other one has 2.5 stars out of 5, which is presumably a mediocre score. And the other guy's got like an angry face, which presumably is a bad score. So not only do they not agree on how to evaluate the work, they saw the work differently in terms of its quality or ability to solve the creative challenge. So it definitely brings to light an issue that we have. I wrote a piece on LinkedIn a while back about take like out of your vocabulary, and it was for marketers about evaluating creative work. One of the first things we look at when we write a brief is the target audience. What you like and what you don't like doesn't mean squat, right? Like, is the target audience going to respond to this in the way we want them to respond? What's your best guess about that? I think should be based on what we know about that target audience, based on what we know about the marketing challenge, the advertising challenge. Those are the questions we need to be asked. Like is a subjective thing. I like this, I don't like that. I get it's a shorthand for saying I prefer this idea over that idea, but I think it's a good exercise to say, look, I'm going to try not to say, and think about how hard it would be to look at three different ideas and not say, I like number 2 better, or I like number 3 better. Instead saying, I think number 3 is the most compelling to the target audience, or number 3 is the most provocative, or number 3 is the most likely to solve the challenge that you guys have identified and that we agree with. So, another issue, and it's not really addressed in this cartoon, is who is evaluating the creative. And when you and I have talked about ultimate decision makers not being at the table, not being part of the brief process, which is a big no-no, and then not being at the table the day of the creative presentation, one of these three people is tasked with sending it via email to the ultimate decision maker, where there's no dog and pony show, where there's no setup, and not surprisingly, a lot of work gets rejected after being initially approved by this panel of geniuses here that we see in the cartoon. So, and go ahead.
I was just going to say, there was something else that you mentioned in a previous conversation, and we haven't had too many, that I actually used in a training. You said juniors should be seen and not heard, because the senior or the most senior person in the room needs to make absolutely clear what the objective is. They need to set the tone for what kind of creative they're looking for, how to fulfill the brand promise, those kind of criteria. Well, I used that in a training at a workshop for an ANA member, and boy, did I get in trouble when I said that. Oh. They were pissed at me because they made a point of saying, we want to give juniors every opportunity that we can to have a say on what the creative is. And I said, I think that's a wonderful idea, but not first. Let the seniors set the tone so the juniors know what it is that they're supposed to be commenting on. I still caught hell for that. My bosses didn't like that. It's like they didn't like me at all.
I mean, you know what? Next time, offer it up not as your opinion, but as an opinion of a 30-year strategist.
My podcast co-host Henry, it's his idea. Don't blame me.
For whatever it's worth, senior agency people want to get feedback from the decision maker. They don't want it to be prejudiced by a neophyte who, frankly, doesn't have the experience or the training yet to make those decisions. If you want to, you know what, you go to surgery and there's a resident there who's just fresh out of medical school, and then there's a chief resident, meaning the chief of all who trains all of the residents. Who do you want cutting you? You don't want the guy who just graduated. He's there to watch, observe, and learn, and in a limited capacity be allowed to participate. But the patient ultimately is the responsibility of the chief resident
Yeah,
or
no,
the
I agree with you.
or the senior surgeon. And I think that it betrays the lack of seriousness with which some clients take this task, which is evaluating creative work. That, needless to say, they're spending millions of dollars on retainers for agencies. The time is valuable. And then you come back and you have and this goes back to our first episode with Vivek Kuchibotla, our first guest, actually, not our first episode. And he talks about juniorcito and juniorcita, which is
Yeah.
Spanish kind of slang for little junior female and little junior male. And it's not appropriate, I don't think, to let them. And typically what you find is to say, well, we'll let them speak first and then I'm going to weigh in and give my. But I think it should be the other way around. The big boss should say, this is why the idea works, not why it doesn't work. Now I see some clients, it's interesting. One client, I'll betray the confidence, it's been many years at McDonald's. We used to have to leave the room. The agency would leave the room like a jury, and we'd leave them to deliberate like a jury. And they would hash it out among them. And then one of them was designated to give the collective feedback to the agency. And that worked pretty well because it wasn't this, they're on the spot, like negotiating their thoughts and feelings and their initial reactions. Like, you might have an initial reaction to something and then somebody might convince you of something different. And that's a lot more likely to happen if you don't have all these outside observers in the room. So I think there's a lot that can be done to improve creative evaluation, basically.
And I agree 100%. And one of the things that I recommend, you and I have talked about this, I think, before, is the creative brief becomes, in my opinion, the best, or certainly one of the better marketing or measuring sticks. If both the marketers and the agency have the brief and can refer to the brief, then you can remove at least some of the subjectivity, because you can say, well, the brief asks us to do X. Can we evaluate this creative based on whether or not the creative answered or addressed or responds to the brief? Now, if the brief isn't part of the process, that becomes harder. But I still maintain that when you have that document right in the room, or at least key elements of the document, the single-minded proposition, the insight, the objective, the target audience, maybe those 4 elements, what they are and who they are, that goes a long way toward at least establishing something to measure the creative work against.
In an effort to extend a simple conversation into a long dialogue, I agree. But the thought that sparked in me is, it's a very revealing moment, by the way, when you say to the client, this is on brief, and you can show that it's on brief, and they're still rejecting it in a way that says, yeah, but that was then, this is now, kind of thing.
Right. And one of the things
that's revealing of a bad client.
Well, it also reflects one of the other findings in the survey that didn't get translated into a slide by Tom Fishburne, but is part of the survey. So if you, ladies and gentlemen watching, go to betterbriefs.com and download that quite 45-page slide presentation on the survey. One of those slides says 9 out of 10 marketers admitted that they they changed the brief after the creatives have been briefed in. And whenever I do training, I show that slide in my training. And when I show that slide, I can tell you almost everyone in the room who's a marketer nods their head and said, yeah, I can't, guilty as charged. They changed the brief. Yeah. So it is something that's hard hard to maintain if you're going to, the criteria changes, the target moves.
if you're in a creative presentation and they say that was then and this is now in
You're in
some sort
trouble.
of way, that's a bad client.
Yeah.
Recently on Facebook, the Pollard, what's his first name? I forget.
Mark
Mark
Pollard.
Pollard. He's got a group called Sweathead on
Yep.
Facebook. It's a group of planners, and somebody asked a question about evaluating clients, and I gave my simple, like, I have an XY axis, and on one axis is nice and not nice, and on the other axis is smart and not smart. And you want clients that are nice and smart, right? Most clients fit into the either they're very nice but they're not too smart, or they're smart and they're not too nice. And then some are the worst, right? They're not nice and they're not smart, right? And so this kind of capricious and arbitrary moving of the goalposts is a not smart thing. And if it's paired with a bad attitude about it, that's a client that needs to be fired, no matter how much money they're paying you, by the way, because eventually it'll destroy your agency. So how how the client treats the agency at a creative presentation is also indicative of, their quality as a client.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And when you tell me stuff like that, Henry, and we have discussions like this, it's just another reminder of why I'm glad I'm teaching and not practicing anymore.
Yeah.
Because it reminds me of some of the headaches, the major
Yeah.
headaches of working with clients that are just
I've been
difficult.
I've been fortunate to work with a lot of nice clients. Some of
Mhm.
those clients were really smart. Um, what I said in the comment in the in the Facebook discussion was, you know what, you can accept douchebaggery from a client if they're smart,
Yeah.
but you can't accept it if they're not smart.
Yeah. Well, to our friends Peter Paul Von Wheeler and Matt Davies, good on you for continuing the conversation and roping in two outstanding icons in our industry, the IPA and Tom Fishburne, presenting these cartoons. It's great. And it gave Henry and I a chance to have another great conversation about your work. So good stuff, Henry.
Good stuff, Howard.
He's Henry Gomez.
And he's Howard Eibach, and together we're the Brief Brothers. Till next time, bye bye and obrigado.